They were called a man-slaying war machine. A lot of historians refer to them as the Spartans of Africa. But what do we really know about the warrior army that destroyed a British column right here where I'm sat now at the Battle of Isandlwana in 1879? What was their organisation? What were their tactics? Did they have firearms? And could they really run 50 miles in a day and fight a battle at the end of it? And stay tuned till the end to find out, were they really as good as people say they were? You might be surprised. Okay, they had the famous regimental system, the Amabuto system, and to understand the Zulu army, you've got to understand that structure. Some say it was invented by Shaka Zulu himself, but he didn't necessarily invent the idea. Earlier, Zulu-speaking peoples had already grouped young men together after puberty into guilds, partly for initiation and partly to keep them useful. Shaka took that tradition, stripped out the local loyalties and built a national army on top of it. Instead of organising regiments by region, he did it by age. Every few years, all the young men who had reached about 18 or 19 were summoned to the royal kraal. They were formed into a new Ibuto or regiment, given a proud name, a set of distinctive shields and feathers, and a barracks of their own, an ikanda. These amakanda, which is the plural, dotted the kingdom like small military colonies. Each one acted as a local HQ, a tax office, and a royal statement that said, "This ground belongs to the king." When the monarch moved about the country, he stayed in these regimental barracks, a travelling symbol of authority. The young warriors stationed there worked the royal fields, hunted, built, drilled, and waited for war. The genius of the system was that it weakened the chiefs and bound the young men directly to the king. They no longer saw themselves as members of this or that clan, they were part of the nation. So in a sense, Shaka's system, the regimental system, built a sense of Zulu identity, one regiment at a time. Now, Zulu boys didn't grow up idle. They learned to fight with sticks, to hunt, and to serve older warriors as what was known as udibi, the young lads who carried the food and gear. It was the Zulu version of Boy Scouts meets National Service. By the time they made it to their own regiment, they already had obedience, they had strength, endurance, and they knew how to fight. Once a new regiment or Ibuto was formed, the king appointed 2 senior officers, Izinduna, chiefs, to command it. These men were not always aristocrats. They were chosen for loyalty and ability, often elevated from common origins if they'd proved themselves in battle. Now, one of the reasons local administrators pushed for war against the Zulus was because of the size and power of their army. But how many men are we talking about? Contemporary Europeans often exaggerated wildly. One trader claimed to have seen 50,000 warriors under Shaka, which sounds impressive until you remember he was also trying to sell his story. More careful witnesses like the naval officer Alan Gardner in 1835 put the figure closer to 900 men per regiment and probably 14 or 15,000 total warriors under Shaka. So King Hetwayo at the time of Britain's invasion of Zululand could probably muster about 25,000 Zulu warriors, which was actually the largest army ever assembled by the Zulus. Okay, so how were they armed? Every Zulu warrior owned his own weapons and he took pride in them. The famous stabbing spear, the Ikwa, has long been credited to Shaka's invention. It's not quite true. Versions already existed, but Shaka popularised it and made it standard issue. To tell us more, here's my mate and fellow tour guide Lindizwe Engabesi when I met him at the Clash of Empires exhibition in London.
Well, this is one of the weapons the Zulu warriors were using during these hard times. This one, I think it looks very, very authentic. Here I've got another one. They are different. The long one is called Iko. So this one is, well, we've got Isijula here. But also, fun enough, the noise, whenever they stab this and pulling out, it makes that terrible noise of and as a result, the name will be given to the Asekai as Ikwa, from, pulling. That's what happened on the battlefields of Isandlwana. The British had no idea when they heard this noise, and together with shouting, Ngadla, meaning I have eaten, pulling the thing out. Somebody will be on the ground. Those weapons are the ones they used.
The Ikwa had a short handle and a long leaf-shaped blade about 18 inches long. It was designed for close fighting, no running away, no throwing from a safe distance. If you returned home from battle without your spear, you'd better have a convincing story or a fatal wound, because losing it meant cowardice. There were other weapons too, the Isijula, a light throwing spear used for harassing at range, the Iwisa, a heavy knobkerry for crushing schools, and then of course there was the Isihlangu, the great war shields. The Isihlangu deserves a bit of a broader explanation, so here's another Zulu war expert, probably the expert, Ian Knight.
In my opinion, it's probably even more than the spear, it's the single most iconic representation of the old Zulu military system, because kind of so much hangs in the shields and what it represented in terms of service and loyalty and protection and experience. This is very much the old Zulu army represented in a physical artifact. And the big regimental war shields were in a different league, really. They weren't personal property, they were the property of the Zulu king, and the king would keep them in royal homesteads. So when a man went up to join his Amabuto, his regiment, to fight on behalf of the king, then he'd be using one of the king's shields. And the concept of the king's shield is quite an important part of the whole sort of process. The implication of mutual protection, you look after the king. When you fight for him with his shield, he looks after you, he shields you from the enemy. And then physically these things were then the manifestation of that.
Yeah, so you've got one in your hand there. What do we know about this one?
Yeah, this is a genuine one brought back from the 1879 Anglo-Zulu War. It's a regimental shield. It's always difficult. The colour on the front of the hide represents the regiment. So what would happen is that the Zulu kings would match herds of cattle according to the colour of the hide. And then when a new regiment is formed, some of those animals would be slaughtered and the hides would be used. So all of the men in that regiment then carry shields of that pattern. This is a pretty standard example. Probably this is from the colour, my guess would be the Ukandempemvu regiment, which was a regiment of men in their late 20s, early 30s in 1879, played a very prominent part in the Anglo-Zulu War, were present in the Zulu centre at the Battle of Isandlwana, and then very prominent at the battles of Kambula and Ulundi. Interestingly, and I've spent a lot of time trying to work out the colours of the various different regiments, when you were a young warrior, because of course the Zulu regiments were formed of men of a common age, so they all start out about 18, 19, and then they kind of get older, and every few years they're issued with different shields. So you start out with a predominantly dark one, then like this one you start to get white on it, and you end up with a predominantly white one at the end of it.
Oh, so is this reflective of hair colour?
There's an association between this and hair colour, yeah. And the kind of grey beards end up with the white shields.
Right.
But also, partly because of the hair colour thing, white has associations of maturity and experience. So from a commander's point of view, if he looks in the distance, who are those guys? Oh, you know, they've all got black shields, not much experience, but they're quick and they're keen. They've all got white shields. These guys have been through this before. You've got that immediate sort of judgment of who's who and where they fit into the scheme of things. In fighting in traditional warfare against African enemies, it was used in a distinct technique. There was a way of using this thing, and you would rush down on your enemy. The whole Zulu tactical system was designed to bring as many men to close combat as quickly as possible. If your enemy is throwing spears, then you shelter behind it, so you're not much of a target. You could probably brush aside a thrown spear with a bit of luck, and then you rush down, and the idea was that when you get up close, you batter your enemy with the shield like that, and then as he falls backward, you get in under arm with a stabbing spear like that.
So it's a bit of a myth as well that the Zulus did not have firearms, because they did. And at the time of the Zulu War, it said they had about 20,000. The problem was that they were poor quality, so they had old breech-loading muskets and poor powder. Not only that, but they weren't really trained how to use them. For example, we're at the Battle of Rorke's Drift. I'm stood now right in the middle of the British compound. And on the day of the battle here, if the Zulus had had decent firearms, good rifles, and knew how to use their front and rear sights, they could have dominated the British position from the caves up on that hill. And it wasn't part of their tactical doctrine to use firearms properly. They would advance with them, they'd fire a volley, hit and miss, dump the weapons, and then charge because they wanted to use their spears and assegai. So when someone tells you the Zulus only had spears and stabbing weapons, they're wrong. You know, if you've watched this channel for some time, you'll have seen that I've got a huge soft spot for Osprey Publishing. Just look at this shelf. That's just a small section of the books they have available. Absolutely incredible. They've been feeding my obsession for military history before I'd even heard of the Anglo-Zulu War. They've got hundreds of beautifully illustrated titles covering everything from medieval knights to modern commandos. Now, obviously, a few of my favourites are about the Anglo-Zulu War. Here's two: Zulu War 1879, Zulu War Volunteers and Irregulars. The artwork is stunning and the research is first rate, absolutely brilliant. And what I love about Osprey Publishing, or one of many things I love about them, is that they're always putting out new and fascinating stuff. Take this one for example, Continental Soldier versus Hessian Soldier, American Revolution 1775 to 83. That's written by friend of the show Robbie McNiven, a top bloke. This illustrated study reveals the crucial roles played by German troops and commanders fighting on both sides during the American Revolution. It's out soon. Then we've got this, The Rise and Fall of the British Army 1975 to 2025. That's written by former soldier Ben Barry, who was in the military from 1975 to 2010, often in key staff appointments, so he knows his stuff. It looks at the change the British Army's seen in the last 50 odd years. From the low point of the 1970s, then the 1980s, the first Gulf War, Afghanistan, and they're now an army that keeps on shrinking and is arguably dealing with obsolete equipment. And they're also available in a digital format. I've just brought for my Kindle Ian Knight's fantastic book on the Battle of Blood River. It's quite a new title, it's really good, and it works fantastically in this format. You can zoom into the maps, it's really good. And I've also been very happy to discover that a lot of their books are also available as audiobooks on Spotify and Audible. So if you're always on the go like me, that's a win-win. So whether you're into assegais and redcoats or AK-47s and mercenaries, Osprey's got something for you. You can find their full range at ospreypublishing.com. I'll pop the link below. Now, when it comes to battle, the Zulus had a system both simple and terrifyingly effective. The horns of the buffalo. The main body, the chest, fixed the enemy in place. The horns on the flanks, made up of younger and faster warriors, swept around both flanks to encircle the enemy. And the loins, or the reserve, waited behind to exploit success or cover a retreat. Not only was it tactically effective, but it was terrifying to behold, a real psychological weapon. The way they would bang their shields, stamp their feet, chant their regimental names and call Usutu, which was the Zulu war cry under King Cetshwayo. Even experienced British soldiers could become terrified.
Well, a Zulu regiment can run 50 miles and fight a battle at the end of it.
Well, there's daft it is then. I don't see no sense in running to fight a battle.
So of course the Zulus were fit, they were strong, they knew what they were doing. But could they cover 50 miles a day and still fight a battle at the end of it? Well, that looks unlikely. In reality, yes, they had hard feet, yes, they could move fast. They could move into places the white troops with their ox wagons and their slow-moving logistics train couldn't move. But Ian Knight has looked at the statistics, he's looked at the numbers, and it looks like they moved more at a pace of about 15 miles a day on average. Yes, perhaps on some days they could move faster, but there's no proof that we've found that they could do anything like 50 miles a day and still fight a battle at the end of it. Okay, so here's the part of the film where myth meets reality. By 1879, the Zulu army was still powerful, but it hadn't actually fought a major campaign in decades. Most of Cetshwayo's regiments had never been in battle. The last serious fighting between Zulus had been the Civil War of 1856, the Battle of Isandlwana, 23 years earlier. It was a bloodbath, yes, but it meant that by the time the British crossed the river into Zululand, a whole generation of Zulu warriors were untested. So much for the image of the battle-hardened warrior. Only 4 regiments Isandlwana were veterans of that earlier civil war, but the rest fresh, confident and utterly certain they could smash the British, but lacking any real experience against disciplined rifle-armed troops. Zulus had never faced an opponent who had modern rifles and artillery. Their last war against a white enemy had been in the late 1830s when they'd taken on the Boer frontiersmen and been smashed at the Battle of Blood River by, let's be honest, a tiny force of Boer farmers. In a way, during the Anglo-Zulu War, the Zulu overconfidence became deadly and was arguably their undoing. Isandlwana was a triumph, yes, but a triumph against a very exposed, overstretched and badly commanded British force. It tricked the Amabuto into thinking that they could destroy the British in pitched battles. But at Rorke's Drift, Gungundlovu, Kambula and Ulundi, the Zulus charged head-on into well-prepared defences and were slaughtered. They fought with incredible bravery, but their tactics never evolved. The victory at Isandlwana had blinded them and given them false confidence. They came on in the same old way and they got smashed in the same old way. They relied on speed, numbers and elan to break their enemy, when a better option would have been to use guile, draw the redcoats into the open and defeat them there. But in fairness, not every Zulu commander stuck to the old methods. Some, like Mbalini wa Mswati in the north, showed real tactical imagination. He ambushed British patrols, raided exposed and badly organised lagers, used firearms from cover and fought more like what we would now think of as guerrillas than as parade ground regiments. The irony though is that Mbalini wasn't even a Zulu. He was actually a renegade Swazi prince fighting for the Zulus. His troops fought alongside the men of the Abakulusi clan and were victorious at Ntombe Drift and Hlabane. So were the Zulus the Spartans of Africa? In some ways, yes, they built a disciplined, centralised military machine that terrified their neighbours and humbled a European army. Their organisation, loyalty and courage were beyond question, there's no doubt about that. They were also victims, though, of their own success. The same traditions that had forged their strength also left them inflexible. Their army was built for hand-to-hand combat in open country, not for storming lagers and forts bristling with rifles, Gatling guns and artillery. Where other African powers like the Basotho and the Bapedi adapted using horses, guns and terrain, the Zulus stayed loyal to the old ways, and that loyalty cost them dearly. Still, the legend endures. Even the British who fought them couldn't help but respect them. Kipling said it best when he said a Zulu impi dished us up in style. And for a brief and bloody moment on the slopes of the mountain of Isandlwana, that's exactly what they did. If you've enjoyed this video, leave a comment and subscribe. In the meantime, watch the video that's on screen now, as I think you're really going to like it.